A mastermind, unmatched for his sheer brilliance.
He's been described as a criminal genius.
A career criminal in search of the biggest robbery in history.
He always believed that out there somewhere was that one fantastic job, the really big hit.
A man who'd go to any lengths to achieve his goal.
But he was quite meticulous in his planning and quite daring.
A dedication that paid off with a $65 million heist.
It was the biggest robbery that ever took place in Britain.
In 1986, a charming Italian playboy arrived in Great Britain. His name was Valerio Vici, and he liked being the center of attention.
He wanted to be a film star, but he couldn't be a film star, so he did the next best thing. He became an armed robber.
He saw himself a bit like Butch Cassidy in the Sundance Kid, a bit of a mixture of both.
He was an amusing and lively guy, combined with quite clearly a commitment to violence and ruthlessness.
Bank robbery gave Vici a life filled with luxury cars, expensive jewelry, and beautiful women.
He had made a very conscious decision about lifestyle and about what kind of life he wanted.
But beneath the designer suits and movie star smile, Valerio Vici liked being bad.
As he said to me one day, James, I've lived by the gun, and I think I'll die by the gun.
He loved it. He loved it because he had a total disregard for authority. And he would have shot you. If you had been in his way, he would have killed you. Make no mistake about that.
Greed and power weren't the only things driving him to crime.
He got into robbery really through violent politics, and then realised that rather than change the world through politics, what he wanted to do was change the world by stealing as much money as he possibly could.
Police in Italy were closing in. Vici decided to leave town. With 24 bank robberies under his belt, he headed to London.
And what happened was, when things got too hot for him there, he transferred his activities to England.
Vici assumed an alias and readily adapted to life in London.
And he could speak a lot of English when he came here. He did that by taking advanced courses in London. And while he was doing that, he set up a couple of bank robberies.
Fairly quickly after arriving here, within 2 or 3 months, he carried out a very big robbery on Coutts, the merchant bankers.
It was an audacious target. Coutts was the Queen's Bank, and it had an air of impenetrability.
This was a company, of course, that with a 300-year history and who'd never, ever been robbed.
Undaunted, Vici devised a simple plan.
He had a girlfriend who assisted him with the robberies. She used to write their demands on a piece of paper, on a piece of card, that he would actually show to the screen.
It was a crude stick-up, but it worked.
I think that they were caught completely off guard simply by the audacity of what he did, which was to walk into one of their branches in Cavendish Square, thrust a gun in the faces of the bank clerks in there and demand everything they'd got.
It was a daring heist and remarkably easy for Vici. He bagged over $500,000. Over the next 6 months, he carried out 4 similar robberies. The English police noted a new kind of robber was in town. He was armed, ruthless, and always made his getaway on a motorbike. But Vici had a serious problem. He didn't know where to stash his loot safely and secretly. Walking through London, he came across the Safety Deposit Box Center. It was located behind the world-famous department store Harrods. Safety deposit boxes are super secure storage facilities that house row upon row of small sealed safes, which you can rent on a monthly basis. Perfect for a busy bank robber like Vici.
A lot of people with secrets kept security boxes. These were people who had a lot of cash money that they didn't want to declare. These could be straight businessmen who simply didn't want the tax authorities to get their hands on the money. Or they could be criminals like Vici himself, who had money that they'd stolen from one place and they needed to hide it somewhere else.
Vici didn't waste any time in renting a box. His mouth watered at the thought of so much wealth so close at hand. Vici cased the vaults over the next several weeks. He wasn't optimistic. There were security cameras everywhere. The individual boxes were made of steel and had double locks. Robbery seemed impossible. But then, his social life put him on a path with destiny.
He started to move in a circle of people around certain nightclubs, and he met a man who had the keys to the bank. Quite literally, he met Parvez Latif, who ran a security company with vaults in Knightsbridge.
This chance encounter with the man who managed England's wealthiest vaults could be the key to the robbery of the century.
From that meeting, the first time that he was formulating a plan to take down that place, because he knew that that place would hold more money than the Bank of England.
Vici used his charm to pump Latif for information. Latif told Vici his own salary was dropping because the vaults weren't filled to capacity. He was losing out on commission.
The situation at Knightsbridge, they had a huge amount of boxes, but only a small percentage of them were actually used by clients. So when Vici was aware of this, he then began to put this plan together.
If Vici could convince Latif to work the inside angle, he might get his hands on the treasure trove after all. He put all his energy into courting the would-be accomplice.
That relationship flourished, and it revolved around Vici trying to talk Latif into this robbery plot, which of course he eventually was able to do in a fairly short space of time. He persuaded him, said, "Come on, we can take millions of pounds out of this, half for you, half for me," and Latif was putty in his hands.
Vici was now one step closer to his dream of pulling off the biggest robbery in history. It was time to start drawing the plans for the perfect heist. Valerio Vici, an Italian bank robber, had come to London to pull off the biggest heist of his career, the Knightsbridge vaults. He had already charmed the vault's manager, Parvez Latif, into helping him plunder the treasure.
Vici had a Svengali-like influence over Latif, and he persuaded him that they could not fail to get away with it if they put together a little plan.
When he got Latif into it was half the battle to know what was going on. So he knew the location, he knew where the vaults were, he had even diagrams drawn for him.
Using blueprints supplied by Latif, Vici began planning the quickest and most efficient route around the vaults. Latif had also indicated which boxes were empty and which were rented, but there was still a lot of work to do for Valerio Vici.
There was no master key. It wasn't a question of walking in and dismantling the security system and pressing a button and all the boxes would force themselves open. Vici knew exactly the boxes that were operational, that were actually being used.
But getting into them wouldn't be easy. Without a key, Vici would have to crack each safe by hand. That would mean bringing a chisel and sledgehammer into the vault with him.
The situation was quite clear-cut. I mean, he got an inside person that would allow him access, and really it made the whole thing very easy. So the question was very much a question of, timing and when it was going to be carried out.
Perfect timing would help Vici pull off the heist of a lifetime. Bad timing would send him to jail. For days on end, Vici studied the activity at the vaults from behind the tinted windows of a van. Armed with a portable computer and a tape recorder, he documented the employees' schedules, the guards' shifts, and the customers' arrival times. After 2 weeks, Vici had a finalized plan. Vici would hire a crew to help him, but no one was to know that Latif was in on the plot.
What Vici suggested to Latif was, if Latif were to take him in there one day when it was quiet, posing as a prospective client, that they could then fake a robbery.
Vici and one accomplice would enter the vaults posing as prospective clients. Latif would give them a guided tour. He would also make sure that security cameras were disabled. Vici and his accomplice would overwhelm Latif and the guards. The other crew members would then enter by the back door armed with heavy power tools for cracking the safe boxes. Vici also had a day and time. The heist would take place on a Sunday because it was viewing by appointment only, which Latif could control. The best time would be between 3 and 5:30 p.m. because only one guard would come to lock up the center's main vault door at 6. Now Vici had to get his crew together. Professionals would want a big share of the pot, and they might have their own way of doing things. Instead, Vici decided to go with an amateur gang he knew he could control.
He was in total control of this operation. The people that he took on board were I go back to the analogy of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, because if there was a hole-in-the-wall gang, they were the hole-in-the-wall gang. None of them had any experience of this type of crime. Certainly the magnitude of what Vici was taking on.
Vici picked a bunch of petty criminals he had met at a London nightclub. They were David Poole, a butcher, Eric Rubin, a salesman, Peter Donahue, a restaurant chef, and Israel Pincus, a retired soccer player.
But looking at their criminal backgrounds, they were well and truly out of the depth. Because none of them were strong, and none of them had the ability to do anything remotely like what they eventually did.
Vici's crew was under his thumb to the point that they believed they would be killed if they backed out. If they went through with the plot, however, they stood to make $1 million apiece.
There was intimidation, that once they were in it to go the full hog.
The heist was set for Sunday, July 12, 1987. In the final week build-up, Vici locked himself in his apartment. There, he recreated the size and shape of the vaults with lengths of yarn. He rehearsed the plan over and over. If he wanted to succeed, he had to beat the clock. He had just 90 minutes to break all the boxes open. By the end of the week, he was confident he could pull it off with his eyes shut. Vici would only have one shot at the real thing. Sunday afternoon had arrived. It was time to go. Vici and his accomplice, Eric Rubin, entered the vaults through the back entrance at 3:10. The rest of the gang waited behind Harrods. Latif greeted them as planned. The 90-minute countdown had just begun.
They then met with Latif, who took them along there. All of them were dressed in business suits, looked very smart, carried briefcases. And when they arrived at the control room of the Knightsbridge vaults, there were guards on duty, as there would be on any shift. And of course, here comes the boss with the smartly dressed guys, so they had no reason to be suspicious.
Vici covered his mouth with a handkerchief, pretending to have a cold. He hoped that no one would recognize him from his many previous visits to the vaults as a client.
He certainly wasn't identified. And then it all started.
After the tour, Vici asked to be taken to a private room, a place where clients viewed the contents of their boxes.
Vici then, from out of his briefcase, pulled a Beretta automatic pistol. Guns was put to Latif's head. One of his accomplices produced a sawn-off shotgun. He was suddenly told, right, this is a robbery. Tell your men to cooperate or we'll blow your head off. So the guards, of course, unarmed, not able to resist, were very quickly suppressed. They were cuffed up. Latif played the part. He pretended to be nervous. He pretended to be terrified for his life.
With the guards under his control, it was time to get the rest of his men inside.
By this time, Valerio is ringing his people outside, saying it's all on, and they then came in.
The plan was working like clockwork, and the scene was set for the most brilliantly executed crime of the century. The biggest haul in history. Sunday, July 12, 1987, 3:45 p.m. Inside the Knightsbridge vaults.
We had a certain amount of time to do this, because I think it was around 5:30 in the evening. The centre has to be visited manually by security personnel. So even though they had incapacitated all the security staff in the premises, they were working against the clock.
Every second counted, and Vici ordered his men into action.
Disappeared downstairs. They produced power drills, case openers, big crowbars. It was quite a matter of ease for them to start to attack these boxes. It took them probably 3 or 4 minutes to break open each one.
Fortunately, they didn't have to worry about being quiet.
It was in the basement, and they were banging away at this thing. And the only people who could hear him were the security guards who were handcuffed to the columns inside.
With the minutes ticking away, speed was critical. Vici and his gang formed an assembly line.
He took a hammer which was honed down to a fine point, and he would then smash the lock of each individual box until it sprung, and then he would pull it open. So as he went along hitting the boxes, damaging the lock, springing open, he would move along, and behind him would come the other gang members. Because even he, as clever as he was, he didn't know exactly what he would find in the boxes.
It was like unwrapping Christmas presents. The bounty exceeded Vici's wildest dreams.
I mean, as they opened them up, there was everything, thousands and thousands of banknotes.
Millions of pounds worth of pearl necklaces, of diamond brooches, bearer bonds, cash, Fabergé eggs. There was a huge amount of dirty money. There was criminal money. There was money in there that was being kept back by various business people to fool the tax authorities.
The plan was moving forward to perfection. But with Vici racing against the clock, he made a terrible mistake.
They did 121 boxes. And during that time, Valerio cut his hand, left a fingerprint.
With the heist nearing completion, Vici didn't stop to worry about the forensic evidence.
There was 3 layers of metal on all of the boxes. And as he put his hand in quickly to pull it open, he cut his finger and left the fingerprint inside the box.
Vici and his gang successfully plundered 121 boxes for over $60 million in cash and valuables.
After the robbery, they took all the bags, there's about 6 or 7 bags, and they were laden with money, drugs, diamonds.
With the new shift of security guards scheduled to arrive soon, Vici ordered the gang to gather up the loot and leave.
All the bags were put into the back of the van, and Vici was driving.
Vici and the gang fled the vaults and made their way to the getaway vehicle.
He alone was in charge of all the property. And at varying locations, as he was moving to his safe house in North London, he dropped each individual gang member off.
The gang knew that they would be given a mere $5,000 pocket money until the heat had died down, while Vici would take the millions to a predetermined safe house. One hour after Vici's gang had left the vaults, Britain's elite detectives from Scotland Yard swarmed the scene. They knew they were in the wake of a criminal genius. So many masterstrokes had been pulled. The security cameras had been disabled by Latif, and not a single image was recorded.
It was obvious to the police right from the start that this was an enormous robbery. Knightsbridge vaults were very, very well known as places where very, very rich people kept huge stashes of jewellery and money. Although it was impossible to say exactly what had gone, because the contents of each box were only known to the key holders, it was clear to the police that this was going to be a multi-million-pound crime.
I knew that if it was a safe deposit centre, it had to be something quite big, so I went up to the scene. And when I went downstairs, well, it was just mind-blowing. I mean, that was littered all over the place.
This had to have been planned with some kind of inside help. What they didn't know was who was the inside agent.
This was the hour of truth for Latif. He had to turn in an Oscar-winning performance to the police.
But he was a very quiet individual in any event. The fact that he would sort of walk around the centre and say nothing, it wasn't unusual. It wasn't as though you would think, well, he's showing signs of nerves, he's not speaking to anyone. He was just very, very quiet. The last person in the world you'd have thought would have been involved with Vici.
With Latif putting on such a convincing front, the police couldn't get a fix on the suspected inside man, so they turned their attention to finding some physical evidence.
The forensic people moved in. The whole scene was examined in detail by the forensic team.
Within 24 hours, the crime scene investigators had found Vici's bloody fingerprint. The print was immediately processed through Scotland Yard's International Fingerprinting ID system.
We got positive identification come back that it belonged to Valerio Vici. It's often been speculated that, would we have caught him if they hadn't found the fingerprint?
Identifying Vici was one thing. Catching him was something else. Valerio Vici had robbed $60 million in cash and jewelry. and he left his signature.
He must have known that he would be making himself vulnerable to Scotland Yard through leaving that bloodstained fingerprint behind.
Vici traveled through Latin America. Then he made one fatal error. He returned to London to ship his beloved Ferrari to his hideout in Latin America.
By coming back to London, he signed his own demise, really. Every policeman in the country was looking for Valerio Vici by this time.
Believing himself invincible, Vici couldn't resist dropping by his favorite place, the White's Hotel in London. Vici didn't know that the police had been tipped off about his return by one of his former accomplices and were secretly surveying the hotel.
In the end, Vici's arrest was exactly the way he probably would have wanted it, because it was something like out of a Hollywood film.
He confessed to all the crimes and said, I did it. That's why he got 22 years.
As a good prisoner, Vici was granted day releases. On one of these, he was shot dead by the police. He was planning another armed robbery. The one secret he took to his grave was where he hid the $60 million he stole.
There's never been another robber like it, and there probably never will be.
Now, high-tech detectives take on a real-life mystery. What deep, dark secrets will they uncover? Follow the clues on Forensic Files. Coming up right now, here on Court TV.